I'm in the Docklands once again, but this time I'm south of the river, at Canada Water. Canada Water is a relatively new station, having opened in 1999, and now I come to think of it, I realise that that was the thick end of a quarter of a century ago. But in fact, Canada Water, the place, is only a couple of decades older, if that. Canada Water, the place, takes its name from the Canada Dock, which was part of the Surrey Commercial Docks. It lasted from 1876 to 1969. As the name implies, this handled cargo from Canada, and particularly foodstuffs and timber. Some of the most distinctive workers around here were the deal porters, whose job was offloading the timber. This was hard and often dangerous work involving carrying heavy, rough and slippery bulks of wood over narrow and similarly slippery plank bridges. Much of it was transferred onto barges or lighters for transfer to wharves elsewhere, with the rest being put into storage sheds on shore. Cranes and derricks could assist, but only to a limited extent. Otherwise, the only help the porters had was leather hats and shoulder pads. But from the 1950s onwards, new methods of cargo handling began to come into use, and from the 60s, the shipyards began to turn out huge bulk carriers. Too huge for the Surrey docks, and so Canada Water, and indeed all the other docks around here, fell into disuse. In the 1980s, Regeneration was the name of the game, and so a plan was hatched to rebuild Canada Dock. It would be partially filled in, with the Surrey Quays shopping centre being built on top of it. The rest would be turned into an artificial lake and nature reserve, renamed Canada Water. For this to work, transport would be needed. As it happened, there was a tube line running almost directly under the docks, the East London Line. This had been there since 1869, when it was known as the East London Railway. There were, until recently, ventilation shafts alongside the dock to allow the smoke from steam trains to escape. I don't know, they may still be there, but they're putting another new development in and I can't see. There were two stations nearby, Surrey Quays and Rotherhithe, but another station had been planned for quite some time. The problem with the East London line was that it wasn't very well situated. It ran from Shoreditch to New Cross and New Cross Gate, never entering central London and having poor connections with other lines. To regenerate Surrey docks, something better would be needed. In the 1970s, a new tube line was in the works, the Fleet Line. In the initial phase, this was only going to run from Stanmore to Charing Cross. Phase 2 would extend it to Fenchurch Street. Phases 3 and 4 were less certain. But by the mid-1970s, it looked like there were two possibilities. One was that it would take over the East London Line. But the other proposal, known as the River Line, included the first inkling of what would become Canada Water. The station was Surrey Docks North. Remember that at this time Canada Water didn't exist, so there wasn't really much they could name it after. Unfortunately, at the time it was considered that such an ambitious and expensive tube line just wasn't justified by the expected populations of the places the line was running through. The idea that the Docklands might gain, say, a new high-density office district just hadn't occurred to anyone. But by 1985 the thoughts had indeed occurred to a consortium of property developers who had started planning London's second financial district on the Isle of Dogs, at Canary Wharf. Well, suddenly there was a demand for a tube line. Olympia and York, the developers, wanted a line from Waterloo to Greenwich. The roads just wouldn't be able to handle the sheer number of workers they hoped to attract. This would have been a private enterprise, but the government got cold feet about the concept and instead proposed a revival of the old Fleet Line concept. By this time, the first stage of the Fleet Line had already been open for several years, or as you'd know it, the Jubilee Line. The London Docklands Development Corporation commissioned a new study, and on the 1990 proposed route, there was Canada Water. In 1993 this was authorised and construction could begin. This new version of Canada Water Station would include an interchange with the East London Line, which meant that this section of tunnel had to be completely rebuilt. That's no small request south of the river, where the soil is loose and often waterlogged. The station itself, perhaps somewhat ironically, sits on the site of Albion Dock rather than Canada Dock. Its design was a joint venture between Ron Heron Associates, Bureau Happold, and the Jubilee Line Extension's architectural team. The keynotes are concrete and glass, the centrepiece being this huge great glass rotunda designed to let natural light into the station. Now, I keep bringing Charles Holden up when I talk about modern stations, but Canada Water was consciously influenced by his work. And the rotunda here echoes several of his stations. There's also a bus station designed by Ava Yurichnya, which I am probably pronouncing wrong. And, being a relatively new station, it's all fully accessible. The station opened on the 19th of August 1999, served at that point only by the East London line. Just under a month later, on the 17th of September, the Jubilee Line extension opened, or at least that part of it. In 2007, the station gained a new entrance inside this giant Jawa sandcrawler thing. That's Canada Water Library, designed by Piers Goff. In 2007, the East London line was closed. In 2010, it was reopened as part of the London Overground network. This connected the East London line with a number of other underused lines to create an orbital rail network, which was far more useful. With the popularity of this and the Jubilee Line extension, Canada Water became a popular interchange. These days, it's a very useful station. In 2000, it won the Civic Trust Building of the Year. In 2001, it won the Interchange Awards Medium-Sized Project of the Year, which I assume is good. But it's not all positive. As I say, it's a popular interchange, but there is a strong risk of it becoming overwhelmed with passengers changing trains. Architecturally, it is well designed to cope with large crowds. But as of 2019, passengers complained of overcrowding. A survey based on Google Maps data from that year indicated that it was in fact the most crowded station on the Jubilee Line, which is an already crowded line. A few months later, in October, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was criticised for approving a new development known as the Canada Water Master Plan, which would potentially drastically increase the number of local residents and put even more pressure on the station. The plan is apparently to upgrade other stations to make them better able to handle interchange passengers, but given the post-pandemic shortage of funds, that isn't happening with any great speed. Meanwhile, construction on the new development has begun. To quote the old song, there may be trouble ahead. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this overcrowded tale from the tube. If so, please do click the like button and press subscribe if you have not already. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon and here on YouTube for your ever-generous support. You are the upgrade to my interchange. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.